In case you're wondering, folks, this is Project Valiant, Popular Hot Rodding's 1968 Valiant project car. And we are at Outlaw Motorsports in Riverside, California today. And we're installing this Reilly Motorsports AlterKtion front suspension. And it basically replaces the entire front suspension, including the K-member, in any Mopar. This one's for an A-body, and I can't say enough about this suspension. It solves virtually every problem that Mopars face in the engine compartment and in the suspension area. It fixes, you know, the weight problem, obviously. You know, anytime you can reduce the weight on the front of a suspension, that helps. But from a clearance standpoint, oil pan clearance, header clearance, steering clearance, suspension geometry, weight balance, I don't know if I said that before, the steering with the rack and pinion, every aspect of performance is going to be enhanced by this system. So we're going to install it today. So sit tight and enjoy the show. Now what you want to do is read the instruction manual, which we're guilty of not doing, and Ron is mumbling while he's reading the manual, which is what guys do a lot. And basically we have to point to where we have to take that off. Yeah, we have to drill that out. That's what we're going to do next. And these are the little factory brackets that you have to take out, because what's going to go there is the side of the K-member right there. Now that we've got our tabs taken off of the frame rails, it's time to lift the K-member for the AlterKtion into place. And I got to put the bolts in now. And then you got these 4 bolts that go on it. Very, very simple. It's a Mopar. You couldn't make it much easier. Now you got to drill some holes out here for the shock tower support bolts. Then you got a couple of 9/16 inch bolts you got to come in with. We're now at the point where we're putting the lower control arm in, and we've got the pivot pin, the bushing, and the sleeves. They all have to be in the proper sequence, and we also have a little bit of anti-seize, anti-squeak compound in there that will help us be noise-free in the future. Well, there's a little lock pin that goes in there. I guess that keeps the center shaft from rotating inside there and causing galling. You just got to put those in real quick. We're going to put in these new Viking double adjustable coilover shocks. Now, I really like these things. They look good. They work good. Double adjustable, you got adjustment for compression and rebound, and again it's just put in 2 bolts. Earlier we did put the spring in already. It was a whole lot easier than some coilovers on the market. These seem to be really easy to assemble. Well, we're getting ready to put the spindle on, and the Reilly Motorsports spindle is actually a modified Mustang II Pinto spindle that's forged. It has a different steering arm that RMS puts on there for their specific rack and pinion steering system. And yeah, it just bolts right on. The thing about the Pinto spindle, the Mustang II spindle, is that it's really easy to get all kinds of different brake kits for. We're going to end up using a Willwood brake kit that's going to be the biggest that we can put on there for a 15-inch wheel. And there you have it. Real strong, real reliable. Everybody uses them. You can get parts for them anywhere, and that's part of the RMS kit. Ron's looking at the instruction manual again. He's mumbling. We're going to put the upper control arm on next. Or he's going to do it, and I'm going to pretend like I do it. Well, Apparently some models of Mopars have that little flange on the control arm mount that has to be trimmed away, and we have that. Well, we're done with the cutout on the control arm attachment, and you can see why we need that. It's just got to be able to rotate up and down without touching. One of the interesting things about Mopar suspensions that is retained in the Reilly Motorsports is the upper control arm eccentric bolt, which is actually very ingenious. It has a washer that's welded to the top of the bolt and another one that's locked into the bottom, and rotating that bolt actually allows the mechanic to adjust the caster and the camber. And so we're just going to put that back in. Reilly Motorsports uses an AGR steering rack for their AlterKtion suspension system, and of course rack and pinion steering is going to be a lot sharper, a little bit more precise, and in the case of the AlterKtion suspension, it actually is going to give us a whole lot more room. Typically Mopar steering systems have a problem with getting in the way of things like oil pans and exhausts and headers and so forth. So this is going to free up a whole lot more room inside the engine bay, and we'll see that a lot more when we start dropping in our Indy Cylinder Heads 500 cubic inch big block. In case you're wondering, this is the engine that's going to go into Valiant. It's 500 cubic inch all aluminum low deck wedge motor made by Indy Cylinder Heads. It made 657 horsepower on the dyno. And it's got the EZ1 cylinder heads, which is a wedge head with a stock exhaust port location, so it fits in a lot of places that stock cylinder heads go. It also has the Modman intake manifold, which has multiple bases and plates that go on the top. We have the dual quad setup with the 500 CFM Edelbrock carbs, and it is a solid cam, flat tappet, about 600-inch lift, and this thing weighs about the same as the all-iron slant 6 that was in the car already, so won't have really any weight penalty for it. One of the things you want to do right now is try to find roughly where the center is on the steering rack. So Ron is actually turning this steering rack back and forth, counting the turns. I think it's what, 3 turns lock to lock, Ron?
It's like 2 3/4.
2 3/4, so he's dividing that in half, not quite 1.5 turns to center, and he's going to set it there and check the toe in roughly, just visually. The AlterKtion sway bar measures 1 1/16 inch. It's a solid sway bar, so it's on the stiffer side. It's definitely not the drag racing sway bar. It's definitely a road racing autocross sized bar, and it just bolts right on up here. Pretty easy. You got bushings that go on and mounts that go on right there. One thing I just noticed about the RMS cross member is that there are these large rings there for towing. Obviously, they know Mopars. Just kidding. Don't send me any death letters. To install the steering on the AGR steering rack, you're going to have to knock this little roll pin out of the steering column using a tool, and that'll allow you to put the linkage on. RMS recommends that if you want a little extra header clearance on your engine bay, that you make a small cut at the end of the steering column, and that's exactly what we're going to do here with the Valiant. Oh, here it is, shortened, the steering column, and in its place we've got a brand new steering column bearing retainer support right there, that's gone in. Ron put that in using some Loctite. Also, since we can't use the column shifter in this car, it's, it has to do with the size of the engine and the headers and all of that. We can no longer use the column shifter, so we took off the neutral safety switch, which was located right there. So if you're going to take the column out of the car to do this, it's a good chance to do that while you're at it. The rack and pinion conversion comes with an intermediate steering shaft that has to be cut to length, because every application is a little different. So you get that steering shaft in there and you just make a little mark. You want to probably cut it a little long to start with. Time to put the roll pin back in on the upper. Well, this view shows you one of the big reasons why the AlterKtion front suspension makes so much sense for a Mopar. Right off the bat, you no longer have any torsion bars. You don't have a big old steering box in the engine bay. And you don't have that steering linkage going across the front. All that takes up room. You can never get to your headers. You can't put them in. You can't get your starter. Oil pans are a hassle. All that stuff, all those problems are solved. Plus, it weighs less. Gives the car better balance. You got sharper steering with rack and pinion there. You can adjust your ride height. You got double adjustable Viking shock absorbers in there. It's really the best of both worlds. We can't wait to drive this thing. It's going to be great.